So I've got no cutesy little joke to begin this video on like I normally do, because all I have to say is holy crap, was this an epic freaking finale. Yes, I am here to review the season 1 finale of The Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World, and I literally just finished watching it. I'm like, kind of just like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of jazzed and excited. And honestly, this episode is what I've really been waiting for this show to deliver me. Not that I haven't enjoyed the rest of the series so far. If you've been following my reviews, you know I've been really, really enjoyed it. But like, having finished this episode, I immediately like, oh, can I have season 2? And it makes me just want to go and read the books right now so that I can know what's going on, because I'm just very excited at the end of this episode. And I was just so pumped and so like enthralled throughout all of this. I am very excited. We'll get into it in just a second. But just to give you a brief disclaimer, number 1, I'm going to go full into spoilers here for the finale. Just know that going in. And number 2, if you happen to be new to my reviews of this season, well, where have you been? Come on. I've been doing these reviews. Come on. Why are you joining in now? But jokes aside, glad you're here. But just so you know, I have not read any of the books, as kind of obvious from what I mentioned before. So this is my perspective from the views of someone who has never read the books and only knows what's going on in the series. So just keep it kind of spoiler free in the comments and give a little bit of a spoiler warning in case there's anything that you want to talk about with the books. I'd happily want to have it down in the comments. Just leave a little bit of a spoiler warning so that I don't catch anything that might be a little bit of a spoiler for ahead. But let's get into the review, because again, hot dang, was this episode just truly epic. This episode was not like super crazy and mind-bendy like something like a Game of Thrones sort of ending, and I hate to keep comparing the show to that. I'm just sort of using it as not a fantasy example, but just sort of like Game of Thrones ending was like, oh my gosh, that was really shocking, and that's like the moment you remember, like thinking of like Ned Stark's death from the end of season 1 of that show. This episode didn't have that sort of like, oh my gosh, like crazy moment, but what it did have was really excellent character beats, truly freaking epic battle sequences that like were top notch and really great to see on a television budget, even though I know that this has a crazy budget just to begin with, but just really epic battle sequences. Some great world building moments. I'm like, oh, that's interesting how that kind of builds out the world, and some creepy kind of elements going on here. And then some great like just moments throughout. So a strong finale, and one that like I couldn't pick any one specific moment. It's like, oh, that's like the crazy moment that I will always remember from this finale. But I just remember the energy and just the sucking in nature of this episode that just really drew me into it. I absolutely adored it. But let's get into the beats of this episode that I kind of want to talk about specifically. The opening of this episode was really cool. We got to see 3,000 years ago, which I'm assuming is a previous turn of the... I mean, it obviously is a previous turn of the wheel. And we got to see the last dragon talking to the Aes Sedai of that time. It was interesting to see that there's still this split between men and women, and that the dragon at that time was like, look, I need the women on my side, and you're not giving it to me. And I like this sort of like, you can see this friendship that's between these two characters. They built it up really quickly, and you get the sense that like, oh, he feels betrayed, but he's also has this hubris of like, I can save the world by myself even without them, which obviously we know is incorrect. That obviously does not work out. Two other things that I thought were cool with this: I like that they were speaking another language, so that it kind of shows that this turning of the wheel is definitely like has like different little shades of it. It's not that they're speaking English, it's not the same language on all turns of the wheel. And also I loved when you got to see outside of the window, you got to actually see a science fiction sort of like setting that it looked very different, and clearly was a much brighter future, much more, again, science fiction setting for the world, showing how much more dilapidated this turning of the wheel is that we're watching throughout this show. So I like that distinction. Also, it's just cool to see like a sci-fi setting within a fantasy world. I feel like I've read a few books that are like that. I'm thinking of like Incarnations of Immortality by Piers Anthony was like my first sort of science fiction / fantasy novel series that I ever read, but you rarely see that depicted. I don't think I really ever totally see a fantasy / sci-fi matchup, so it was just cool to even see brief glimpses of it here. So cool thing. But then this brings us back to our present day heroes, where we get to see Rand and Moraine going into the Blight, the Rot, towards the Eye of the World. I loved everything going on with this. I love creepy crawly horror vibes, and they kind of nailed this. Like the first encountering of that kid who like went into the Rot sort of set the stage for how dangerous this place is, that like anyone else going through here will die almost instantaneously. Very good scene setting here. But then they come across this old city that looks like it has been covered in this rot for over 1,000 years, but as but this is actually where Lan was born. And so Rand is sort of shocked to see that it looks old, even though it's only been like that for 40 years. And so again, I like this idea that this rot is spreading and it's so powerful and just sucking everything into it. And again, a creepy kind of concept going on there. But then Rand goes to sleep and he has a vision, and we get our first encounter with the Dark One. I have to say, I was pretty shocked when Moiraine got the knife through the throat, but then I really realized, like, obviously a dream. But I was like, oh shoot, it got me for a second. It did a decent job. It was very unexpected. But I liked this Dark One. I didn't catch the actor's name, but this Dark One was not what I expected. I mean, knowing that this was sort of a kind of a fantasy series written in the 80s. I mean, nowadays we kind of expect a little bit more like a anti-hero type villain. But knowing that this book series, I should say, was written in the 80s, to see a villain that was much more sort of like devil on your shoulder kind of guy, and much more affluent and able to like just speak very plainly to Rand, I thought was very cool. It's not a revelatory villain by any means. I've seen different villains like this, but not what I expected for this fantasy setting, that he was actually speaking truths to Rand, that his father was not his father, and sort of recognizing the hair and blade, which must have some significance possibly going forward. So I liked this encounter here. My only problem with this, and in a later sequence with the Dark One, is that Rand came across a little bit like naive. I get that he's not supposed to listen to the Dark One, but he's just sort of like, this is a dream, and I think he would have been a little bit more enthralled and interested in this, and I think it would have also helped pay off the end story beat a little bit more too. But it worked fairly well here. I just think Rand was a little bit not as... I would have been much more raptured. Maybe I'm not a good Dragon Reborn. Maybe that's just me. I liked the scene, though. I thought it was very strong. But then this brings us back into the city. I don't want to get to the end bit with Moiraine and Rand just yet. So going back into the city, I liked everything that we saw in the city here. We got to see Egwene and Perrin and everyone sort of dealing with the fact that Rand abandoned them. And we got a really good scene, I think, between Perrin and Egwene sort of using Perrin for comfort. I like that, sort of showing their bond. And then I also like Night and Eve and Lan as well, and Lan just speaking sweet nothings to Night and Eve, basically like, you are very important and wonderful. I'm like, oh, if a man spoke like that to me, shirt off right there, I was like, dang, all right, Lan knows how to turn on the charm, I will just say. But then, obviously, once he turns on that charm, then Night and Eve is like, okay, well, I'll just tell you how to get to Moiraine. I don't think that was the dynamic. I like that Night and Eve was sort of like giving it to him because he felt that he wanted to go after Moiraine. But I would say it's just like kind of funny. It's like, you're wonderful, amazing. Okay, here's the information you need. I just thought it was kind of cute. But again, I don't think that was the actual dynamic. Then we get the crew going to see Kai, the girl who can see a little bit of the future. We see Night and Eve almost getting killed, a little vision of that, or sort of hinting towards possibly the end of this episode, possibly something further down the line. I don't know exactly what she was predicting, but it was sort of, it was a good setting of the stakes for what we would see coming down the episode. But then we see the Dark One's forces amassing outside of Faldara, so the two Lord siblings sort of have a nice conversation. I really enjoyed this conversation between the two of them, because the Lord basically says, look, this is not our battle to win. We are here to die. We will lose this battle. Our job is just to wait and make us last a little bit longer so that other people can escape and other people can prepare for the final battle. And I like that sort of like willingness to sacrifice yourself because you know you're never going to win, but you know you have to do it anyways to just give people a chance. I thought was just a cool way to enter into this battle, that we know we're going to lose, but we're going to put up a hell of a damn fight as best we can, and everyone just sort of coming together to accept that. These characters were not like super strong characters that I really cared about. We'd only met them just last episode and only in passing really, but I did like seeing this sort of like willingness to sacrifice yourself. So I did not care too much about these characters, but I liked how they were written. They were just so evocatively drawn, even in the short period that they had. But then we also get a little reference that there are Dark Ones in the city. I'm assuming it's Pod and Fane, the guy that we've been sort of seeing in the background of a bunch of different episodes this season. Like that, sort of building that out here. But then we have our crew members sort of talking about, like, what should they do? Should we leave? Should we abandon each other? Night and Eve saying, I don't want to abandon all of you. Again, building up the bond of all of these characters. But then they kind of go their separate ways, with Night and Eve and Egwene going to help the lead channeler defend the city. And also Perrin getting really frustrated with Loyal, saying, like, I want to do something, I wish I could do something. And I like Perrin sort of having this pent-up, like, rage and wanting to just get it out. I think it's, like, building this sort of, like, inner rage that he's been having this entire season, and I'm sure is going to be playing out in his character arc throughout the rest of the series, probably. And Loyal just saying, like, we can just ask for what they want to do to help. And so this brings us finally to the big battle. Again, epic battle sequence. I don't have much to say about it other than it was damn cool seeing the Trollocs going up on the wall. We got to see the fades out in the battlefield, the Lord sort of like just shooting arrows. I did think he got taken out a little bit too quickly. I would have liked to see some cool little sword fights, but what are you going to do? I mean, after last episode with the cool sword fight there at the beginning of that episode, I'm like, I don't know if you could beat a pregnant lady just killing a bunch of guys. But I did think this whole sequence was appropriately built up and excellent. And then seeing the Trollocs go across the field towards Night and Eve and the rest of the channelers was also really cool. And we got to like see them all channel their channeling together to help her just destroy these Trollocs with all this lightning and crap. Very cool to see, and we see it burning out these women as they're doing it, and you realize the danger to them is not just the Trollocs getting to them, but the fact that they would burn themselves out from the channeling. But then at this point, Egwene starts to get burnt out as well, but then Night and Eve sacrifices herself to save Egwene, which was, I was like, oh dang, if that's the end of Egwene, that's really rough, but I could totally have bought it as the end for her. But we'll get back to that in just a second, because then we're going over to Perrin. We have him being confronted by Pod and Fane after they dig up this horn, which is supposedly going to be used by the dragon to bring all of the warriors of the wheel of this turning together to fight the Dark One. So it's a very important horn, apparently. You can't just send out a little, like a message, but you just gotta blow the horn. And so, but Pod and Fane comes in and steals it and kills Loyal, apparently. They better not have killed Loyal. I'm going to be very upset if Loyal's dead. If Loyal's dead, I'm going to be very pissed off because I loved that little guy, and he was absolutely wonderful, and I'll be pissed if he's dead. Just straight up, I will want Pod and Fane just dead for that, if that's the case. But going into the character reveal here, I did really like this idea that he explained to Perrin that all 5 of them are spokes on the wheel, important people in this turning, and while Rand may be the Dragon Reborn, all of them are important, and not every turning has all 5 wheels, and some of them could turn to the dark, some of them could turn to the light, some could go all one way, some could go all another way. And I like this resetting of the stakes of how important people were is really, really great. I think that that's really, really cool, because this entire season is built up around who is the Dragon Reborn, and now we have that mystery set up. But I like that this is more interesting. I think this dynamic's more interesting, where it's like everyone's important. Dragon Reborn's the most important, but everyone is important. But about which side of the line that they're going to come down on is the key in how this turning is going to turn out. And so I thought that was a brilliant idea, great sort of setup and world building for the next season, and shows us how different this particular turning could be, because there are 5 spokes on the wheel instead of just 1 or 2 as normally. So I think that that's really an interesting sort of metaphor and idea to really distinguish what makes this turning so important to watch this time as opposed to any of the other turnings that we could have been watching on this show. So great little setup there. Pod and Fane gets away with the horn, and Perrin is probably most likely the candidate to turn to the dark. We're sort of left with that impression, given his rage that he's been having this entire season. So excellent stuff there. All really great. But then this brings us back to Rand and Moiraine at the Eye of the World with, I love the moment before they go in where Rand says, does anyone, you said everyone that goes with the dragon would die. Does that include you? Moiraine says nothing. He says, you can stay, and she goes with him. Now, obviously, we know she has an ulterior motive, but it was like a nice moment. It's like, I'm going to stand with you in this moment. And so they go down into the Eye of the World, and there's a cool little yin-yang symbol. Again, the idea of the dark versus the light down there. And Rand starts to have a vision of Egwene, of a world that he could have had. And again, the Dark One comes in and tries to turn him to his side, to say you can either strengthen my chains or you can break them. And he almost makes it work, because Rand does want to be with Egwene. We've seen that throughout this entire season. He wants to have the kid. He wants to have that world. And I like the seduction here is that you have the power to change the world. You can do whatever you want. And so all you have to use the dark power in order to break my chains to do it. Again, a nice little temptation here. I would have liked to see more of the Dark One before this, to see this temptation a little bit more, but it does work effectively here. Again, I do think Rand is a little bit like quick to buy into the illusion at certain points. Like, no, don't let, I always get bothered by that in movies and TV shows. This is not just an Eye of the World problem. And I get that there's mythical stuff going on, but I always hate it when it's like clearly an illusion and a character's like, no, don't hurt the person. I'm like, it's an illusion. It's fine. But it's just something that it always just bugs me, and it's still present here, but it's sort of a trope, so I'll let it go. But I do like this confrontation, but eventually, while this is going on, Moiraine says she will kill Rand if he chooses the dark. Again, setting up that interesting setup there, again, showing her sort of willingness to sacrifice to do whatever is necessary. But then the Dark One takes her power from her, which is also really interesting, that her power is right at her fingertips, but she can't use it, which I'm sure will be an interesting dynamic for her going into next season, because Rand does use the light and defeats the Dark One, which I was kind of shocked about too, because I was like, dang, all right, as I guess that's the end. We're done. We can all wrap up here. I think we're all good. I think we can go home. Everything's fine now. Obviously, that is not the case, but obviously this is, as Moiraine says at the end of the episode, this is just the first battle, not the last. And so I thought that that was really, really cool. Last few revelations here is Rand leaves, tells Moiraine to let everyone think that he had died, which I think is an interesting choice, mostly because it, again, separates everyone from everyone else, and also will probably make everyone be vilifying of Moiraine for letting Rand die there for what they think, but also Rand's doing it in order to protect others. So it'll be an interesting dynamic seeing that going into season 2, where that's going to go. But obviously Lan shows up and they find this crystal, I guess, that cannot be broken except for by the one true power, and it was broken here. So interesting to see where this is going to go, and interesting to see where the Dark One is going to show up. And also at the end here we get Egwene managing to save Night and Eve, bringing her back from the dead or healing her in that moment. Probably more the healing power, because I know the Aes Sedai have healing power, so that's probably what was going on here, and that maybe she has like really strong healing magic. So all of that was super interesting, and we get one final scene at the end here where we get to see some ships showing up and channelers that can channel water and make giant waves and apparently kill a little girl. I mean, why are little girls always hanging out on the beach getting murdered? I mean, the same thing happened in Jurassic Park 3, if I recall, and a bunch of other movies where whenever there's just a little girl playing on the beach, it just never ends well for them. Never ends well for them. But a cool little hint towards season 2, seeing the other versions of the power that you can use. You can use it against water and create big waves, and we have a new force coming in. Don't know who they are yet, but I am curious to find out next season. So that brings me to the end of this episode and end of this review. As I said, this was a thrilling, action-packed episode. We got some new evolutions of the lore of this world. I got to learn a little bit more about how things are set up. There's some interesting threads being set up for next season. Rand being by himself, Moiraine not having power, Perrin and everyone else possibly turning the dark side, and all being important. All really cool ideas being set up for future storylines. But having watched this, again, nothing revelatory, nothing like crazy, like I will remember this moment, but I will remember the energy this gave me, and it makes me want to read the book right freaking now. I still have to finish my Leviathan Falls book, the last book of The Expanse. I have another Star Trek book that just came out to review, but once I finish those two, which I'm hoping to finish over this little break that I'm having next week, then The Wheel of Time is the next book on my list. So if you're looking for that, probably sometime within the next month or so, I will probably have a review of the Wheel of Time book. I am very excited to get into that, and then also probably early next year I'll probably review some of the animated shorts that they did, because I've been curious about those, but I was waiting until the end of the season so I can have a little things to like string me along after this season is ended. So don't worry, there's still more Wheel of Time content coming on this channel. I'll obviously be reviewing season 2 when it comes out, so don't forget to stick around and subscribe for all of that. I'm very excited for all of that. Looking forward into the rest of this year. Next week I'm kind of taking off a little bit of a break, so don't expect any like major content coming next week for me. I will probably review Star Wars Book of Boba Fett next week, and I will probably also, I have a video coming out on my main channel that is sort of like a nice little fun video about my favorite things of the year. But if you're looking for like content that is exciting and wonderful and my favorite stuff, my Sex and Star Trek video recently came out last week. I'm still very, very proud of it. If you have not checked it out, it's literally a feature film about Star Trek and how Star Trek has both inspired and has flaws, and I think talking about sex is a great way to talk about themes of identity, race, and how science fiction both inspires and fails at the same time, and how that is part of the story of humanity. And I think talking about sex is just a way to access those stories. And I also talk a lot about the history of Gene Roddenberry and some things that I don't think get talked about enough, including some darker stuff with Gene. So if any of that interests you, even if you don't like Star Trek, the video is made to be accessible to non-Trekkies as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have not checked it out, I think it is my magnum opus, the best thing that I have made so far, though hopefully not the best thing I'll ever make. I think there's many more things ahead. So all of that's coming in 2022. I am looking forward to talking to you more. I will see you next week, hopefully for the Book of Boba Fett and for further Wheel of Time content. But until then, live long and prosper, my friends.